Yes. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Next item of business is Spotlight. For this, we will go to Ms. Keys.
Thank you, Mr. Lyons. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Spotlight section of our agenda for Tuesday, June 3rd, 2014. Ponus Ridge Middle School named a Connecticut PBIS banner school. The Norwalk Board of Education is proud to honor the staff and students of Ponus Ridge Middle School for the success in implementing positive behavioral interventions and supports, also known as PBIS. In recognition of their work on PBIS, Ponus has been named a Connecticut PBIS banner school by the State Education Resource Center. Criteria for recognition as a banner school includes effective implementation of key PBIS features, a focus on decreasing the over-representation of referrals with students of color, and a commitment to continuous improvement. The State Education Resource Center found all these features evident at Ponus Ridge Middle School. Ponus introduced the PBIS program in 2010, and it was the first school in Norwalk to do so. The school-wide PBIS program established a standard set of procedures and expectations for students and rewards those who meet the school's highest standards. From the time they enter Ponus, students are made aware of the behavior that is expected of them at all times every day, whether it's in the classroom, cafeteria, or in the hallways. Those expectations are also reinforced continually throughout the school year. You can ask any student at Ponus, and they will tell you that Ponus Pride stands for perseverance, respect, intelligence, diversity, as well as excellence. Students who exhibit the elements of Ponus Pride are rewarded with special privileges, prizes and awards, and positive postcards that are sent to home. By shining a spotlight on positive behavior, Ponus has created a culture of respect and achievement that has changed the climate at the school. Among the results is a dramatic drop in school suspensions, which has declined by more than 50% each year since PBIS has been in place. We here on the board would like to congratulate the entire Ponus Ridge Middle School community for its recognition as a PBIS banner school. So I would like everyone to stand, any of the community, parents, and leaders as well, and we'd like to honor you for this. We have here Dr. Suckner, Dr. Damon Lewis, Jeff Iannazzo, Kim Helliher, Mary Jordan, Claire Woodman, and Joanne Duff. Come up here, we can give you the certificate, please.
Everybody?
Everybody can come up as well, that would be great.
Thank you.
Linda. Good job.
Congratulations.
Thanks for what you do. Thank you. Mary.
Thank you so much.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Great work.
Congratulations,
Thank you so much. Very much appreciated.
Well done.
Okay. All right, next we also want to take an opportunity, as the board traditionally does over the time, to recognize former members of the board who have left at the end of a term. This is, as those of us sitting here know, a tough and often very thankless job. And the people who run for this position serve out of love for their community, not for the massive paycheck, which for those of you who don't know is zero. And one of the people that we're going to recognize is Steve Colarossi, who recently served on the board, and his very good friend, Vice Chairman Kasimis, has a few words.
I just want to say that it was a pleasure to work with Steve for 2 years, I think 2.5 years when I was appointed to the board. One of the things that stands out about Steve, in addition to his flair in the room here, was his brilliance on the policy committee, and I mean that with all sincerity. Steve would always look ahead and see what's coming down the line, and wouldn't be caught by surprise, and he would put things together in advance. Case in point is the recycling policy, which he did 2 years ago. He already put the framework together so we can go ahead and begin that. Also, the work he did with the anti-bullying in the schools, what I appreciate is that he included everybody. He included the kids, he included the teachers, he included the coaches, and he asked for everybody's input so he can do something that wouldn't hurt one party and enable another party. But it really was an all-encompassing policy that works great for everybody involved. And so, again, it was a real pleasure to work with you, Steve. Thank you for what you taught me when I was green, when I got on the board. But your brilliance is missed, and also your flair. But allow me to read what it says here. It says, Steve Colarossi, for the years of service and dedication to the education lives of Norwalk's children, through serving on the Norwalk Board of Education 2009-2013, presented June 3rd, 2014 by the Norwalk Board of Education.
I'm booking you for my eulogy.
Thanks.
You're doing a great job on policy. Congratulations. Actually, the view is just as good over there. I noticed that Steve brought with him his son Anthony, who I believe, if my calculation is correct, will be in the Norwalk High School class of 2032. So Steve, you got to stay active for a long time. I would also like to add that Steve and I had some disagreements, but they were always cordial disagreements. And his intelligence and his wit were valued. And I know there were at least a few occasions where my head was about to explode because of something that was going on, and you would come up with some witty statement over there, and everything would be smoothed out. So I appreciate all the times you rescued me like that, Steve. I miss you all. Some more than others, but have a good night.
Thank you.
All right, and we're also going to recognize, unfortunately, she was not able to make it, Sue Haney. We also have a plaque, which we will get to Sue, again, recognizing her for years of service and dedication to the educational lives of Norwalk's children through serving on the Norwalk Board of Education 2009 to 2013. It was a pleasure for me working with Sue. She was a very active participant in the whole process of the superintendent search that brought Dr. Rivera to Norwalk. She was a leader in pushing for early literacy, like the Wireless Generation program. She did an excellent job chairing our negotiations committee and negotiating savings for the school system, which bore some fruit this year when we generated $2 million of savings on our insurance account, thus allowing us to carry out some new initiatives and also actually help the city out for once on a budget. So I would just like to recognize Sue in absentia and thank her for her service. All right, let's see. So next item is public comments. Mr. Kasimis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Public comments. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for taking your time to be with us tonight. Public comments, just some guidelines. You have 3 minutes. When you come to the podium, please give us your name and your address for the record. When you have 30 seconds left, I'll wave my hand. At 3 minutes, I just ask that you would close. Please keep your comments civil. First, we have Mr. Gary Peterson.
Hi, it's Gary Peterson. I'm Bridgeport, Connecticut. I work here in the public.
We have your address too, just for the record. Your address.
225 Edgemore Road, Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Thank you.
And I don't need 3 minutes. I'm on my lunch break. I just came here to just make it a formal complaint or put it on the record about the privatization of the custodial staff that's going on right now. I'm assuming that I'm hearing that it's going to be as soon as July. And I just want to go on record that I'm publicly against it because it is taking away our jobs and our livelihood. And again, that's really all I have to say tonight. I just want to go on record that I am against it.
Thank you. Next we have, it says Kenny, and I can't read the last name. I think it's Quinones. Is that correct?
It's Kenny Quinones. Address is 126 Spring Hill Avenue, Norwalk, Connecticut. And I was also accompanying with my co-workers here, and I was also against privatization of our employment. I just feel that we should get a chance to cover certain decisions that are open, and I just wanted to put that on the record also. That'll be.
Thank you. Okay, next on the list, we have Mr. John Mosby.
My name is John Mosby, 15 Anderson Avenue in South Norwalk, Connecticut. Everybody knows Mr. Mosby, and I'm not no stranger. I want to say tonight, with those custodians who just spoke, there's a lot of the custodians spoke to me too, and they're scared to death. They don't know what to do. They feel that the union officer have let them down. And they asked me tonight to come here and speak on behalf of them. And I'm not afraid to speak. Everybody know me. I want to tell the truth. What's going on in Norwalk is wrong. I also talked to the 100 worker from Neon who lost their job. And I told them, I said, you know, the union should be out here fighting for y'all. But I'm going to speak on behalf of them. That look like there's a tendency in this town to get rid of all the minority and the poor people in this town. I think it's wrong to privatize and get rid of these here guys without the public knowing about it. We didn't know nothing about it. You're making contracts here with outside vendors, which the public should and the board should look at. Don't nobody know who they are, no record chain, one in the school, no take over the school. What's going on in this town? This is wrong. And I say to these guys tonight, they don't think of Mr. Mosby doing it, because you know I'm a fighter. I just keep on fighting. I don't back out. I think it's wrong. Also at Neon down there, I want to say this for the record, because I know I only got 3 minutes. But those councilors told the truth about Neon down there, because I was at that meeting about them rigging all the things that they found was wrong. And I'm going to say very briefly, I got a document right here, and I ain't got time to read it, but this document was done back, and I kept searching for this document about the Head Start down there. And they did what you call a auditor before, and I asked this board for orders to the maintenance department, and all I never seen that. But this order was done before, if you look at this record, and I would got my answer. The Board of Education used to own the Head Start down at Neon. And if you look at this record, everything was done wrong. They found violation after violation. The corporation them have this document too. All of them have it. And if you see there how they were stealing and carrying on, and this is wrong. And just go on the record. They say they don't have no document. There is document, and here's a document right here. And what I say, I can prove it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mosby. Mr. Chairman, that is all that's signed up for public comments.
Okay. We have actually, I should have done this under the spotlight, but Mayor Rilling has 2 proclamations which he wanted to bring to our attention this evening. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As most people know, during the past 2 months, we lost two very dedicated public servants, two people who gave a lot of their time and their life and their energy to trying to make things in Norwalk a lot better. One of them was the father of our own chairman here, Mr. Lyons, William J. Lyons Jr., who passed away on April 11th, 2014. And, I noticed when we recognize people, a lot of times we just don't know who they were or what they did because we don't really always take the time to learn about them. So in looking at this, I see that he and I had a lot in common. I guess he was a military police chief in this German city of Regensburg, a population of 135,000. So I probably could have learned a lot from him. He returned to Norwalk and he became president of the Lyons Construction Company, which was founded in 1920 by his father. He built many buildings in town, including the Norwalk Post Offices, the building at Norwalk Hospital, Merrimack School, major expansion of Nathan Hale School, the St. Thomas Church, and he later became general manager of the 3rd Taxing District. He also was an active in Norwalk politics. He served as a 3rd Taxing District Commissioner, served 2 terms in the State House of Representatives, and a term representing Norwalk and Darien in the State Senate. And he served as chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So on May 13th, when I put together this proclamation, I said that therefore, I, Harry W. Rilling, as mayor of the city of Norwalk, Connecticut, do hereby honor William J. Lyons Jr. in Norwalk, and in doing so, urge all citizens to honor him for his dependability, constancy, and commitment to the city of Norwalk. So I wanted to present this to Mr. Lyons.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that a lot. I'll share this with the whole family. This is great. Thank you.
The next proclamation I have was in honor of somebody that you all know very, very well, who passed away on May 22nd. And when I was talking to Chris Bradley from the library and some others from the library, they're going to name a room after her called Judy's Room. And they're going to have a quote from I believe William Shakespeare that says, though she be small, she's fierce. She was fierce. And I think if you know Judy, she was fierce. And if you would, I'd like to read the proclamation and then ask for a moment of silence in her name. Whereas Judith Rivas, former director of Library Information Services, Norwalk Public Library, passed away on May 22nd, 2014. She was born December 8th, 1955 in the Bronx to the late Ismael and Ramona Rivas. She worked at the library for over 28 years, where she loved helping everyone who came through the doors. Judith Rivas graduated from Bronx High School of Science and Fordham University and Southern Connecticut State University with a master's degree in library science. She was a co-founder and active member of United Hispanic Action of Norwalk, as well as a member of several other community organizations. And in 1997, she joined the Norwalk Common Council to complete the unfinished term of then State Representative Joseph Clemens, who had been elected to the state legislature. She proceeded to be elected to 3 Common Council terms in her own right. And whereas Judith Rivas' proudest actions while serving on the Common Council were advocating for the city to purchase Fodor Farm, which was slated to become an oversized condominium development, the city bought the parcel, and after several years of laying fallow, the farm was restored and is now a true gem of the city of Norwalk. She then was elected to the Board of Education, where she served for 2.5 years before leaving to care for an ailing parent. On behalf of the city of Norwalk and as mayor, I want to acknowledge Judith Rivas for her commitment to serving the people of the city. And now, therefore, I, Harry W. Rilling, as mayor of the city of Norwalk, Connecticut, do hereby honor Judith Rivas in doing so in Norwalk, and in doing so, urge family and friends to remember her for her dedication and constancy to people. So if we can have a moment of silence for Judith. I did bring this to the house when the family was sitting Shiva and presented it to them there as well.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All right, we'll now move to the superintendent's report. Over to you, Doctor.
Okay, I have 2 items. First one, before I introduce or ask I don't need to introduce him, but ask our former mayor, Alex Knopp, to come forward and introduce the next subject. I just want to sort of take us back to December when we presented the recommended budget to the board. And when we did that, we described where our revenue sources come from that support public education here in Norwalk. And it was interesting to note that less than 10%, actually it's about 7% of our revenue comes from the state. Yet as a district, we are in a category, a classification of schools where there are students with comparable demographics and needs, in some cases exceeding 50%, as we are close to, of children eligible for free and reduced lunch. It is a district that for many, 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 many years has been seeking its fair share of funding. And before I say too much more, I'm going to ask former Mayor Knopp to come forward and introduce our presentation tonight. And I'm going to pass out 2 documents that go along with it.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Rivera and Mike, for giving me this opportunity. I want to congratulate Mayor Rilling, too, for attending all those proclamation classes at Mayor School. You did a very good job there. Obviously, school funding is a issue second to none in Norwalk's importance. And it seemed to me when I was mayor that after having served 8 terms in the state legislature, it was unlikely that we would have legislative action to fundamentally change the funding formula because of the political balance of power in favor of suburbs and rural areas in the state legislature at the expense of urban areas. And therefore, contrary to past lawsuits, which often sought simply to fund fully the existing formula, which the legislature had not fully funded, those didn't help Norwalk because the formula, as Dr. Rivera said, disadvantaged us based on our property wealth. Soon after I became mayor, I was contacted by one of the nation's leading education finance consultants, Dr. Diane DeVries, about whether we would consider joining a different kind of lawsuit, one which did not seek to fund a defective formula, but which sought to change the formula to become an effective one that would guarantee, under our state constitution, an adequate education for every student. As a result of her expertise and advocacy, I worked with Mayor Malloy from Stamford, Mayor Boughton from Danbury, Mayor DeStefano from New Haven, Mayor Armento from Hamden, Mayor Perez from Hartford, and myself. The big city mayors decided to bring this lawsuit based on her recommendations and expertise. And the lawsuit was filed in 2005. Norwalk joined because there are expenses for expert witnesses and other litigation expenses. And I want to tonight also thank Mayor Moshe for continuing Norwalk's participation in the lawsuit. This can only be done on a nonpartisan basis. Once anybody in Hartford thinks that anybody's trying to get any partisan advantage out of this, you are immediately discredited. And the fact that Mayor Moshe continued it was very important to Norwalk's participation. And I want to thank Mayor Rilling for continuing that and for also agreeing to serve on the executive committee of the Connecticut Coalition for Justice and Education Funding, so he can provide even additional leadership. Dr. DeVries is going to give you a presentation now. We'll give I'm sure, a very thorough explanation of the basis of the lawsuit, and more importantly, I think will help educate all of us that the issue of education funding isn't just a matter of throwing a dart at a board and hoping we get more money. There really is a logical and rational basis to trying to figure out what is the cost of an adequate education when it comes to a child who lives in poverty, a child who may not speak English at home, a child with special needs, and many other kinds of factors. So I want to thank the Rilling administration and the Board of Estimate and City Council here for agreeing to continue funding the lawsuit. I want to thank the Board of Education for being supportive. I in fact, had the pleasure to meet Dr. Rivera, I think about 7 years ago, at a conference at Teachers College at Columbia when litigators from all over the country would get together and discuss the status of these lawsuits, and that's when I first met him. I've had the privilege to work at Yale Law School on this case since 2006, and as Diane says, we're on the eve of a very important date in the trial, and I think Norwalk can hope that this litigation under our state constitution will produce a better outcome than we've had in the past. So it's my pleasure, and I really, again, appreciate Dr. Rivera and Mike for letting me do this. Introduce my good friend, Dr. Diane DeVries, and I think she'll really show you why this is such a critical issue for the future of Norwalk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you for doing half of my speech. That will shorten the time I need to be at the podium. I want to thank Dr. Rivera and the board, the planning committee in particular, for inviting me to come here this evening to share with you the story of what this city and Board of Ed has been up to for the last 10 years, helping bring forward probably the most important lawsuit in the history of Connecticut's education. Certainly, it's the largest one. Our judge has even said so, and I don't think anyone can argue with that. Let's see. Are we ready now? Okay. I can figure out how this one works. Okay. No, I'm going the wrong direction here. Pardon me a minute.
Use the other arrow.
You want to go down?
Use the other arrow.
How do I go down? Sorry. Yes. I was using this one.
There you
Okay,
go.
that'll do it. Okay. Fine. Up here on the table is a brochure for everyone here in the audience. Please be sure you get one before you leave. That will tell you all the things that I'm going to skip over tonight. There is also a form. We are looking for parent members. Parents, meaning anyone who has a preschooler through grade 12 child in the public schools. That includes interdistrict magnet schools or charter schools. It does not include private parochial schools. We need parents to be members of CJEF because that's part of our basis of the coalition. We have membership categories, as you will see here. Then we'll be listing the municipalities, of which we have municipalities of all wealth levels across the state, except the very wealthiest. In other words, Lower Shelford County. We have boards of education from across the state, representing school districts that are high-performing and low-performing and just mediocre, all of which are striving to do better. And for that, they need resources. Our members also include statewide professional education associations like CABE, CAPS, the teachers' unions, the two teachers' unions, and CFSA, CONCASE that represents the special ed administrators, the Bridgeport Child Advocacy Coalition, and many other kinds of organizations like that that routinely advocate for education. Parents, of course, because under the law, parents and students who are 18 years old or older have the right to bring this case along with us, and we have fought for that right, let me tell you, and other concerned taxpayers. This is a membership organization. This is not a class action. If you're a member of CJEF, you and your population of the city, of the Board of Ed, are all covered in this case, and therefore plaintiffs through your membership with CJEF. We have quite an impressive group of people that brings the attention of the court, and that's extremely important. You don't file a case like this unless you have a big following. These cases not only are extraordinarily expensive and lengthy to litigate, but it requires winning the case in the court of public opinion and having enough clout in the legislature to actually get the remedies through ultimately. So we have half of the state's public school children in our communities, 3/4 of all low-income, free reduced lunch children, 3/4 of all minority students in the state, 3/4 of all those who require ESL services, and many of them not getting it, by the way, and 3/4 or more of all the homeless children. I assume we have about 50 or 60% of all the special ed kids too, just by virtue of the school districts that we serve. This is one of the two really most important slides. It's our mission. This is what we are all about, why we founded this coalition, why we are going to such extraordinary lengths to sue the state of Connecticut. Because we want a school finance system that supports equal educational opportunity for every child, not just for those who have the blessings of having been born in the right geography, but all children. Quality schools in every neighborhood, not just in wealthy communities, and not just in special little boutique schools. Every school should be a high-quality school. And this is the other really important slide. This is the goals and objectives, as you might want to call it, of our mission statement. Adequacy, equity, and property tax relief. That's really, in a nutshell, what we're all about. By adequate education, we mean not just an adequate education so that every child has an opportunity to master the standards that are set by our state, by our local community, by the federal government, but it's also an adequate education in terms of the adequacy of resources that support that learning, because you typically cannot provide an adequate education if you don't have the substantial amount of resources to go with those children. Obviously, we want to revamp the ECS formula. That's the major equalization formula that at one time, at least, as it was originally construed, over 80% of all education aid to municipalities came through that formula. And that's where we want it to be, because the equalization formula means it's trying to level the playing field across our municipalities, that a poor community should have the same ability to support high-quality schools that a high-wealth community should have. And that was established under Horton versus Meskel back in 1977. That's how the equalization formula eventually came about. Equalization formulas exist in most states of the nation. Unfortunately, most of them don't work very well. And that's why we have lawsuits like this one, well, sort of like this one, in many states. And in fact, I think across the years, maybe the last 30 years, all but about 5 states have gone through this very same process that Connecticut is going through, albeit it didn't take 10 years to get to trial in those states. Equity. By equity, we mean equity for children, and we mean equity of resources for our schools and our towns. Property tax relief, I don't need to explain that one. There isn't a person in this room who isn't suffering from that. I can assure you, whether you own your home or you rent. And this is routinely reported in every survey as the property tax that is most in everybody's face, that they hate. It is also the 1700s form of funding our local schools. It is completely outdated, outmoded. It no longer serves the purposes of public schooling anywhere in the United States. And in every state's lawsuits, they are fighting this, though many of them did not really have the fortitude to come forward and cite it as a claim. We decided from the get-go, if we were going to have a broad-based coalition with municipalities and school districts and teachers associations and advocacy groups from the community, all sitting together at the table, we better be looking at all the major issues. What are the 3 things we all totally agree upon, even at budget season? Adequacy, equity, and property tax relief. In November of 2005, as Alex mentioned, we filed CJEF versus REL. The lawsuit that is now proceeding to trial on the merits in early September. Lead plaintiff is CJEF, the corporation, of which you folks have been members for the last 10 years since we formed the organization. We also have 25 named school children from, I think we have 10 various communities that they come from. They represent the kind of characteristics that we are claiming are a problem. Children who need ELL services, children who need far better special ed services. Just ordinary, average American Pie kids who are not being challenged at the level they need to be challenged. So that's who the plaintiffs are. Defendants, you see there, governor, treasurer, comptroller, state board of ed, and the commissioner. Those are required under the law. We had no choice. When we first filed this case, obviously Governor Rell was the governor, and in all fairness to her, she actually was quite cooperative about all this, very much so, but we won't go into that tonight. But it did indeed alienate certain communities who saw this as a political move against a very popular governor at the time. I don't know why this turned green all of a sudden, but Superman to the rescue. Oh, that's what it did. Okay, I must have knocked it. Oh,
Oh, it's gone. Now it's unplugged.
oh, thank you. Thank you very much. It's been a very long journey, and actually this journey started before filing the case in 2005. It started back in 1998 when Updike, Kelly and Spellacy, a Hartford law firm, filed Johnson versus Rowland. Johnson was a school student in East Hartford, and of course John Rowland was the governor. And they filed that case in January, I believe it was, of 1998. They filed it essentially as a tax equity case based upon the Horton decision of 1977. My primary home is in New Hampshire, though I vote in Connecticut, and I have a condo in Hartford because of this case. And I got a phone call in New Hampshire. We had just gotten the state Supreme Court there to declare that state's school funding system unconstitutional. And one of the things that I have been involved in was was putting together a symposium for the legislature and a background paper on just what is adequacy and equity and how does a state go about resolving this kind of a Supreme Court decision. Well, that paper got me an invitation to Connecticut, to Hartford, to meet with Updike, Kelly and Spellacy, whereupon I told them, I'm sorry, of course there's a tax equity issue here, but you filed the wrong case. This is essentially an education adequacy case. And in the course of that education adequacy and equity lawsuit, we will get at the tax equity. Well, next week I came back and did a PowerPoint to a room full of lawyers, which I should have recognized was the slippery slope right there. Anyway,
Usually is.
on the spot, after they heard some of the data and the slides that I showed them, just using stuff off the website for Connecticut, they decided immediately to refile the case as an education adequacy equity case. And I then spent the next 5 years working with them, building the case. So I've been doing this a long time. I've learned a great deal about how unique every school district is. What goes on in this school district is very unlike what goes on next door, or down the street at Stamford, or certainly up the street in Bridgeport. Every school district is different, your needs are different, your students are different, your community is different. And every municipal government actually operates quite differently as well. So, fortunately, we've had the generous support of the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, CCM, which has been an incredible boon in helping us build a coalition rich with municipalities of various kinds and getting people to come together around ideas. Anyway, let me just skip forward very quickly. One of the dilemmas was Johnson versus Rowland, we ran out of money. We only had 12 towns involved, no school departments at all, just 12 towns. And it wasn't really meant to be a coalition, it was just we needed them to start the lawsuit. And that just didn't work because 12 towns could not possibly sustain the legal costs. These cases, by the way, if our lawyers from the get-go had been billing for this case, we would probably be somewhere in around $20 million in the hole. That's how expensive they are, and we are no means done yet. These cases are extraordinarily expensive, burn a lot of legal time, and you need the best lawyers you can find. It also takes a lot of background support time, research, advocacy, lobbying at the legislature. So, I had the good fortune of coming across on the internet a professor at Yale Law School who had had the audacity to sue his own institution and win. And I figured, hey, that's a guy after my own heart. So I called him up, and 20 minutes later, he said, you know what? I'm going to establish a law practice clinic, and we're going to represent this coalition pro bono. You're not going to run out of money this time. So that's exactly what happened. Professor Bob Solomon, who was at Yale at that time, he's no longer in the state anymore, but he set up a practice clinic for Yale law students. At this point, 10 years later, we probably have gone through about 270 or so Yale law students because, of course, they tend to graduate on us. But they fortunately have their own training system, and they also have the benefit of some outstanding supervisory clinical faculty, like Alex Knopp. And so we proceeded to work with them, and we commissioned an adequacy cost study so that we would have dollars that meant something when we went to the legislature lobbying for more money for school districts and municipalities. As the mayors themselves said, we cannot go there as chronically crying mayors. We have to go with the dollars that we need and be firm about it. So I should also point out, in building this coalition, the very first mayor I went to was none other than Stamford Mayor Dan Malloy. It took him a few minutes only to say, not only do I want to join this coalition, because Stamford has absolutely nothing to lose, even if Governor Rowland turns out to be vindictive, or Governor Rell in that case. We want to join, and I want to be on your steering committee. And he was, till the day he got elected governor. The next day he woke up and was our worst enemy, but that's another story. So, anyway, at one point in 2007, the state challenged the right to a quality education, saying that's not covered in the Connecticut Constitution. And unfortunately, our trial judge at that time sort of agreed with him. And I say sort of because it wasn't, in my view, it was not at all a clear decision, but it was sufficient to bounce the adequacy claims out of the case. That really gutted the case. It left us only with equity. And yet, I don't want to divide this piece of paper into 169 little bits of pieces and rearrange the pieces. The pie is too small. That was the issue, and you cannot get at that point under an equity case. So the membership, as is customary, met. Everybody came. We filled up the Lyceum in Hartford, 120 or so people, and argued the pros and the cons of appealing that case. Do we appeal adequacy, or do we just go forward with equity and call it a day? And at the end, it became very close to unanimous, and I think in the end, those that had voted against turned their votes around, so it would be unanimous. We decided to appeal it. We could not let it stand that there was no right to have a quality education in our classrooms. What kind of a precedent would this set for the future for our children? So we appealed it, and very, very quickly thereafter, the Supreme Court reached down and took it so we didn't have to go through the middle appellate court. We went to the Supreme Court, and you know what? 2 Yale law students, one a second year, one a third year, did the arguing before those justices. The courtroom was filled with Yale Law School students and with lawyers around the state who knew about the case and had tried to help in one way or another, etc. But my fondest memory of that day, other than how brilliantly the 2 students argued, it was as if they were my own children. I couldn't have been more proud. But in that front row, in front of the bench, was the author of the Education Clause of the Connecticut Constitution, Judge Simon Bernstein, who unfortunately passed away last year at the wonderful age of 100. In 1965, at the last Constitutional Convention, he wrote on the back of an envelope the Education Clause, managed to batter it through because he'd been told you can't do this, got it through, got it accepted. Connecticut finally had its own Education Clause. That was actually, we were one of the last states to have it, so it was really about time. Anyway, Judge Bernstein flew up to be there. to also do press conferences at the legislative office building to tell legislators. And that's what we meant by that clause, that it should be good schools. Yes, quality education is what we were talking about in that clause. And in my mind, that saved the day. That turned the tide. And 23 months later, to the day, we had a decision. And it couldn't have been better had we written it ourselves. It was phenomenal. And I will get to that in just a minute a little bit more. But anyway, so after the Supreme Court decision, and by the way, I should point out also, those two students who gave the oral arguments that day were part of a cohort that truly was our dream cohort. It was a group of students the likes of which anyone would die for, and they have all gone off to brilliant, brilliant careers. Great young people. By 2011, the state was back at it again. They really did think that the Supreme Court had made a terrible mistake. To this day, they do not accept what the Supreme Court wrote. And so they started filing all kinds of motions. Again, this is conventional in litigation. The state defends itself any way it can, and at the moment it is throwing the kitchen sink at us, but that's apparently to be expected. At least that's what all the lawyers tell me. One of the things they did was to file a motion to exclude preschool children from this case, that we should not be able to introduce arguments saying that in order to have an adequate education and an equitable education, preschool children need to have access to the public schools, need to be considered pre-K through 12, not K through 12, PK through 12. Well, that didn't go down too well with the Connecticut Early Childhood Alliance and all the early childhood aficionados across the state and the provider system and so on. And a lot of legislators who've been working for many years to improve preschool education in Connecticut. So it didn't take long before that motion went nowhere. Anyway, it's still on the table, but it is unlikely to be heard, is what the informal story is behind that. Probably because the state could not find a legitimate educator in this nation who would get before a judge and swear that there is no relationship between an adequate preschool education and doing well in school and throughout later years of life. There's too much evidence to refute that argument. In early 2012, I and a couple of others at CJEF leadership were summoned to the dean's office at Yale Law School, and he said to us, you know, we're getting awfully close to trial. We want to win this. Yale's name is forever going to be a part of this lawsuit. We want to win this case. How about I just send out a little message to some of our more illustrious Yale alums around the nation and see if someone wouldn't like to come and help us litigate this. So that's what he did, and very shortly thereafter, we had the wonderful opportunity to choose who might come and help be chief litigators of the case and work with the Yale students, but get us through trial and, if necessary, through the appeal process and so on and so on. And it didn't take long to do a little due diligence on Google to find out that one of those asking to help was absolutely the right firm for us. And so very shortly thereafter, Debevoise & Plimpton, one of the nation's largest law firms based in New York City, came on board as our chief litigator. They have a team there that works in very close harmony with the Yale students and with David Rosen and Associates, a smaller law firm right off the Yale campus. And Alex is part of that team as well. It's a wonderful group. It is truly the dream team of lawyers. The state has continued to file pretty obnoxious motions, speaking as a layman. I mean, again, the lawyers all say, well, this is to be expected, but, you know, who wants to expect this kind of thing? Claiming that the judge should dismiss the case, that it's moot. After all, it was filed in 2005, so that's old hat. We are so different today. Education is so reformed since then. Or that it's premature to hear this in a court, because we all know that the 2012 education reform package miraculously has fixed everything. And if we just give it a couple more years to prove itself, you know, all these problems in the schools and with student achievement will have gone away. Of course, it still won't supply the resources needed to have that student achievement, but they don't want to talk about that. So anyway, the motion to dismiss was defended with great fanfare. CTN covered the hearing. By the way, CTN will be covering all of our adventures to trial in the future. They know how important this case is, and so you'll be able to watch pieces of it as it transpires without having to go to Hartford and look for a parking spot in a very small courtroom, I should say. We will also be blogging from the courtroom as the trial proceeds, but more about that when September comes. Anyway, we are now still scheduled to go in September of this year, and we are hopeful that we finally will get our day in court. The trial may last 2-3 months, but we may not expect a decision until middle of next winter, March, April, who knows. Let me go back to that courtroom scene at the Supreme Court with the adequacy appeal. That's extremely important. I just want to say that, you know, that decision lasts regardless of what happens this fall with the full trial. That decision made history. And it's also been used repeatedly in other cases around the nation. The quotes in it are phenomenal. The court described a suitable education, one that prepares students to participate fully in democratic institutions, such as jury service and voting, progress to institutions of higher education, attain productive employment, contribute to the state's economy. These are not all that new of ideas, because they were contained in several previous decisions, beginning in Kentucky in 1989, the Rose case, even in the New Hampshire Claremont case that I mentioned earlier, certainly the New York Campaign for Fiscal Equity case. All those cases basically follow these same lines about how do you define what it is that kids are entitled to. Even though their education clauses are not at all the same, they have the same sentiments behind them, and the courts are interpreting them very much the same way. It went further, though, than many of the other decisions in my mind. At least I've not seen many of these words in other decisions that I've read, in saying that education has a fundamental role in maintaining the fabric of our society. The fundamental right to education. Remember, that's what the Horton case established, that every child has the fundamental right to a free and equal education. That's not an empty shell. It has to mean something. What does it mean to have a free education if the education is lousy? That's basically what it was saying. And the standard by which you judge lousy or good continues to change as the world evolves. That also is extraordinarily important. Really, really important. It's not meant to be a static decision. This is our great legacy, our contribution to the next 50 years or so, or perhaps more, to Connecticut education litigation history and litigation history throughout the nation. Let me just quickly go through a couple of this. The education pie is too small. That's what's wrong with the formula, of course. That's why you're getting so little to begin with. It's certainly not based on what it truly costs to educate kids. It's not based upon what it costs to educate the extra services that children with learning difficulties need to count on having. It was never fully funded as a formula when it was established in 1989. There's been no built-in inflation factor or regional cost adjustment. Let's face it, what you pay in Norwalk is not the same that they have to pay for the same product or same labor in Putnam, the other side of the state. The costs vary by region. Those kinds of regional cost adjustments must be included. The distribution part of the formula is totally flawed and inequitable. That's why you're getting such a tiny sliver of money to begin with. The minimum budget requirement that hits the towns very hard. It doesn't hit you folks nearly as hard because you're used to paying 97% of all the costs. But in towns like Bridgeport and New Britain and Winchester up in the far corner, New London. These towns barely meet the minimums that are required, which is, I think, at this point, 21%. They can't do it. They have no tax base left, and they have maxed out taxpayers. No transparency whatsoever. I defy you to find real information behind these formulas and so on to explain what you're getting on the website. Complete shutdown of any semblance of government transparency. In 2013, after the education cost sharing task force had done its job, the governor pushed through a reform of the ECS formula. So it took effect in 13-14. Guess what happened this winter in the 2014 legislative session? They completely abandoned that one-year formula. Who creates a state aid formula and 1 year later disbands it and does whatever they want to? To this moment, we still have no information about why so many towns got above the formula, above what that formula would have called for. Was it squeaky wheels that got the extra money? Did they just throw a few pages down the stairs and whoever landed at the bottom got the extra money? Was it vote trading that got the money? We don't know. That's an absolute no-no. Now, this is the shocker. And on this one slide alone, on these data here, we ought to be able to win the case. Over 25 years of the ECS, in real dollars, today's dollars, there has only been an increase of $62 million. $62 million in real funding, that's all. I mean, that's the kind of money that ought to be added every year. It's just unbelievable. For 500,000 children, 25 years. But wait, for Norwalk, it gets worse. After 40 years, your per pupil allocation from the state is still less than what you were getting 40 years ago. Absorb that. Prior to 1975, you were getting $215 per pupil. Today, for the 14-15, you're going to get $1,002. But the $2,015 in today's value would be $1,030. How are you supposed to assume that the state is adequately funding you? And you know, just in case you're sitting there steaming, there are 43 other towns in the same boat as you are, including your pals down in Stanford. 44 towns today get less than they got before Horton versus Meskel. Absolutely absurd, totally absurd. Again, great evidence for our trial, not great evidence for our children. Another piece that is a bitter pill for Norwalk people to swallow. Going back to that adequacy cost study that I was talking about. In today's dollars, and this is the latest updated, the consultants in Denver who did that study had to quickly update their study for the state a few months back, and did a very quick and dirty escalation of costs solely based upon inflation. But in that little exercise, they showed that as of now, you are at least $21.3 million per year underfunded by the state, or about $2,000 per child. Do you know what kind of an impact that money would have? Mm-hmm. Tremendous. Mm-hmm. Tremendous. And you know what? That's an incredibly conservative number. That number I would never stand by, and I'll tell you why. They were not able to add to the 2005 study an estimate of all the unfunded mandates and partially funded mandates that have occurred since then. Those costs are inestimable so far. And that includes, of course, Common Core, the teacher evaluation system, all the technology going with the new assessments of CBAC and so on, the in-house suspension rules, and I could go on and on. There have been enormous numbers of education mandates over those years. So whatever this is, who knows what percent to add to it, but this is the most conservative bottom number that would be reasonable to think that you ought to be having, and your children ought to be enjoying. Mill rates, student poverty. I could do many of these kinds of graphs, by the way, and official numeric type correlations that would equate student performance to all sorts of things. But this seems to be the most straightforward in getting at school district stuff and municipality stuff. Equalizing mill rates and student poverty, there you see where Norwalk fits. Anything above that horizontal line is having a lot of trouble. Any one of those towns, particularly the ones up in the right-hand top quadrant. Those are the ones suffering absolutely the most because they have very high poverty. As the superintendent said a few minutes ago, your poverty here is close to 50%, and if it were counted right, I suspect it's well above 50%, because one of the things that ought to be is counting only the poverty of elementary children and extrapolating from that. We know middle school and high school kids don't like to admit they come from poor families, and so on. So let's assume it's at the 50%. I mean, it should be on the other side as well then. The U.S. government, U.S. Department of Education has long assumed any school district with 40% or more of free reduced lunch kids is a school district in distress and worthy of extra federal support. Remember back in No Child Left Behind and so on and so on, in Title I before that, those schools were eligible for what they called school-wide assistance programs. You could apply the money across the school because God knows the impact of that poverty completely was throughout the building. It affects the culture, the learning culture, the teaching culture, and so on. It makes it much more difficult. The obstacles are harder, and they need more resources. So I just wanted to share that with you. Norwalk there, as you see, isn't the worst, but it's probably moving up towards that eastern, the right-hand side quadrant. And finally, I just want to point out that in every state, this is what happens. The state tries to outrun the lawsuit. That's what happened when they raised the $215 suddenly to $250 in 1977, because the trial court had just ruled in Horton versus Meskel, and it was going to the Supreme Court, and the legislature knew damn well that they were going to win. They were going to prevail. The plaintiffs were going to prevail. And so, quickly, let's just raise it by $35 per child and add on another $12.50 from the lottery. Well, the Supreme Court decision in Horton 1 kind of makes fun of that and says, do you really think that's significant improvements? I don't think so. So we have this kind of race to win the chess game, but it doesn't really work right now. It's not working, I should say. I'm not going to say much about any of this because it's highly political, number one, but it's also going to be the state's chief defense when we get to trial. And our experts will be ardently fighting against any pronouncements by the state that this assortment or individual assortment of remedies has actually transformed the landscape of school funding and school performance. It just ain't so. So I will leave it with that. Anyway, I invite questions. Sorry I talked so long. Alex is probably no. Anyway, he told me not to talk too long. I, of course, did it anyway. But I invite your questions, and again, I want to reiterate what Alex said, and that is we want to thank you sincerely for all these years of support for Alex and Mayor Moshe and Mayor Rilling's personal involvements. We're very soon now going to be moving to include a few more people on the city side and from the school district side to get involved as we move forward, trying to put together our ideal remedies for this case and other kinds of strategic decisions that have to be made. We do this in small group work, and then we do it in big forums where every town has a vote, every school board has a vote. So you have 2 votes from Norwalk. And I'm sure you will use those votes very well, very wisely, and we will continue to do everything we can do to win this case and make you proud and solve your problems as much as we can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions, comments, Ms. Keys?
Yes, Diane, I just want to thank you personally and also on behalf of the policy committee for coming in. You came and made the presentation last week, and you really just, it was a powerful presentation, and I think we just really felt that we wanted you to come here and make a full presentation to the board. So thank you for coming on such short notice. I think we told you last week, can you make it to our next board meeting? You said sure. So thank you so much for doing this, and I think we really have to fight to get the funding that we need.
Thank you very much.
Mike?
Diane, can you just, I mean, I know it's very hard to predict these things, but, I mean, this trial will obviously go on for months?
2 or 3 months. Our judge is determined not to let it be like in some states where they meet once a week or once every other week or whatever because of the lawyer's busy schedule, the judge's busy docket and so on. He's made it clear that you better get ready to clear your calendars because this is going to be intensive, 4 or 5 days a week, and we're going to get this done. He's a real no fooling around guy, and we're pleased as punch over that. So with any luck, we might be done before Christmas, and that he then, accordingly to the rules, has 120 days to make his decision, though it's not uncommon, based upon the past few years of experience, that they ask for an extension, and what are you going to say? No, Judge? I don't think so. So we probably can count on being done more or less according to that schedule. And that would mean a decision sometime in March, maybe, towards the middle or end of the legislative session, though the overtone of this case, because the legislators will have heard the whole thing on CTN, and they will know the preponderance of the evidence is clearly on our side. So, again, based upon what's occurred in other states, typically the legislatures don't even wait for the decision. They know what it's going to be, and they get busy. And they get busy working with the plaintiffs because they know otherwise they're going to be back in court until they get it right. And in the meantime, we are building bridges. We certainly want bridges built with your legislative delegation. You have some really great people. Not the least of which is Senator Duff, but I see his mother has left, so you can tell her I said that. We will certainly be working with legislators now that the nominations are over more or less, and we know who's going to be running for re-election. We can more or less make certain that all those candidates have information about this coalition, that we answer their questions, that we ask them some tough questions, and hopefully get them on record as supporting their hometowns and their home schools. Because ultimately it will be the legislature that has to endorse what we want or tweak it in a way that's acceptable.
And I suppose at this point you haven't made that proposal, but would it be a revision of, the ECS formula? Is that the gist of it?
In general, I can say that it won't be dramatically different. It will still be that kind of foundation formula. It's just that the elements in it, the way it will function, will reflect what it really costs to educate kids, and a better equity filter so that people are getting so that school districts and their municipalities are getting their fair share. And then it's not just the ECS formula. Remember, we have challenged the entire school funding system. So we've got to go after all the categoricals. We've got to straighten out the way those magnet schools are being funded. The VOAG programs, which are so essential to so many kids and have lots of empty seats because the state hasn't been funding them enough. This is an outrage. The charter schools, we don't want them taking money out of the municipally based public schools. So we got to find a funding source for them. Or stick it to the state and let them continue funding them. They want to found them, then let them pay for them. And the technical high school system. That system has been underfunded for years. I mean, they've been trying to catch up in the last couple of years, but it's a very little and very late to be trying to do that. All those kids are yours. I mean, those kids in those technical high school system come from our big cities, almost all of them.
So will JEF be making proposals that what kind of an equitable system would be?
Yes,
Is
yes.
that public as of yet?
No, it isn't even ready yet. In principle, let me also clarify this. Plaintiffs do not have the responsibility to come up with the remedies. That's the problem with the state. And I don't know of any other lawsuit in any other state where the plaintiffs have taken it upon themselves to really do this, though I might make an exception for New Jersey because that litigation, and I hate to say that, has been going on under various titles, captions of lawsuits for some 40 years. But we are not New Jersey, thank God. Anyway, we decided, again, at the very beginning, Connecticut being small and being the proud state it is, and divided as two Connecticut's, which are really now three, with the middle class being that middle group, and they are going down the tubes fast. It's important that those remedies be right, or we will have frittered away the last 16 and a half years, as far as I'm concerned. And that's 16 and a half years of our kids' lives. So we need to get those remedies right. Why don't we, with our experts elsewhere, outside the state, get those proposals on the table and explain them to legislators and work with them as they tailor them a little bit and tweak them to make them their own. But this notion that lay people can devise complex systems like this is lunacy. That's why school finance is in such bad shape across the nation. You can't politically appoint a group and say, you go write the formula. It doesn't work that way. You need real expertise of people who do this for a living.
Good luck.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. And more from Dr. Rivera.
I just want to take a few minutes, and I'd like to. Although the last presentation that we had clearly brings up the fact, the importance of getting proper funding and proper state aid for us to do what we need to do to support our children. And when I say support our children, it's provide a quality educational experience 24/7. There are dreams that I have about what we would do with additional funding. I'd love to see a year-round school system. I'd love to see educational opportunities for our youngsters on Saturdays and so on and so forth. But in the meantime, we have to go forward with the resources that we do have. And we have to have a plan, and we have to have our foot to the pedal to the floor, and we have to continually take steps to improve our current practices, how we operate as a system. I'm just going to take 5 or 10 minutes or so, because I want to share with you a follow-up to discussions that we've had that go back 6 months ago when we put together our strategic plan. And in doing so, we talked about, put it up here, on this one pager, a plan that we had where we established our mission, our vision, we set goals, we highlighted a number of key priority areas, focus areas, the importance of changing our culture as a system, how we operate, how we're responsive to people, how we work with parents when they come through our door, how we support each and every child that comes into our system, building knowledge, skills, and capacity for our teachers and our leaders, making sure that they're prepared to lead our schools into the future, creating a new environment in our schools, paying attention to helping programs develop in our school systems and so on. We talked about systems and support structures such as HR and finance and data systems. And I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the teams that are going to be changing. We've had in the system what we call our district data team. That team is going to be renamed, and its work is going to be focused around standards and accountability. As a group, we've had 2 meetings about this going back to January. We are actually going to be working to get consensus on essential standards of excellence for our schools and the kind of improvement planning that has to take place. In addition, during the literacy presentation that I made to the board, I indicated that we should have a district-wide literacy team that's paying attention to the implementation that we talked about, the 9 different strategies that were important, that you voted on unanimously as a board to support. In addition, school governance and improvement teams. I'm recommending, as part of this structure going forward, that every school have a school governance and improvement team. And with that, every school should have an improvement plan, so that we're not only looking at growth indicators that are quantitative in nature, but we're looking at what do we need to do to improve our unique situation in our particular school. What do we need to do to improve curriculum, for example, or program offerings? What do we need to do to improve and address some of the leadership concerns that have arisen? What do we need to do to improve our culture within a school? Every school will have a school governance and improvement team. Every school will be responsible for completing an improvement plan. We will have essential standards of excellence that will guide our schools. Obviously, we have learning standards, Common Core learning standards. We're also going to reach clarity and make certain that we're working together on all the professional educator standards for our leaders and, of course, through for the support of our teachers. Another team that we're going to put in place, and in some respects it will replace some of the work of school data teams, if you will, but every school will have a student progress and intervention team. I'm not calling it a data team. We're expecting our professionals to be there, to knowing and reviewing the progress of every single one of our students and taking steps to intervene. And along with that, we're going to have to provide the support to make that happen. So the standards and accountability team, we had a meeting in January. We reviewed this direction. We had another meeting last week. We continue to focus on the work that we have to get done. We're going to be doing work in 2 different phases. In addition to standards, this team will have a role to monitor student progress at all 19 schools, as well as will the administration. But we're going to work together with our colleagues who make up that district standards and accountability team as we review and meet with our schools to monitor progress across the system. And also during the budget process, we had talked about conducting 1 or 2 school quality reviews each year. I mentioned already school governance and improvement teams at all of our schools. Those will be put in place. We will have a format and operating procedures and standards for these schools to follow in August before everyone returns in the first week. And then our school-based intervention teams, student progress intervention teams, district-wide literacy team. And these are the goals and assessments and performance targets that are aligned with the goals. Remember the goals that we talked about? Mm-hmm. Every child reading on grade level by the end of grade 3. Here's what we're going to do. And it may be hard to see, but we're going to be really clear about the measures. These are the assessments that will be administered to every student. So we have the MCLAS that we are going to be using. And our performance targets, we are going to be tracking and monitoring and reporting on the percentage of kindergarten students meeting benchmark on the 2015-2016 from this year's baseline data. So we will be very clear about baseline data. We're going to be very clear about how we're going to monitor progress and track progress. As we track students to make sure that everybody's on track to meet or exceed learning expectations by the end of grade 3, we'll be, again, using the MCLAS assessments. I've got to qualify this and say that this is for the 2014-15 school year. The state will be receiving these new SBAC, Smarter Balance, interim assessments that we're likely to use. But we're going to continue to report out on our progress and track progress by through the administration of a September beginning of year, that's what BOI stands for, a January MOI, middle of the year, and an end of year May exam. And we've set some pretty aggressive targets here, but they're achievable. We said we want to close the achievement gap by 2020. We were serious. And we want to track the data, and we want to put in place what we need to do that. And so we need to track our performance on an annual basis. We will begin to use this assessment, and by 2020, we want to see the performance of all kids rise to where 90% of our students are meeting targets. For grades 4 and 5, we will use the Journeys, the publishers' benchmarks in the upcoming year. We also have had for grades 6 through 8, there are 2 pilot schools, Nathan Hale and Roten. We will track their performance from the current year, their increase, and we want to see a 10% increase over 2013 performance to 2014, 2015. And the 2 other middle schools, West Rocks and Ponus, will be establishing baseline data in this current year. Obviously, in all of this, we have to track progress of all of our subgroups. As we look at the achievement gap and monitor progress on a school-by-school basis, with all of these data points that we're looking at, we'll be tracking the progress of subgroups. Again, for math, we'll be using the Go Math benchmark assessments for grades K-5. And our performance target for the upcoming year is that 85% of our students will demonstrate proficiency on the district CCSS benchmark by the end of the year, EOY. Grades 6 through 8 in math, 75% of our students will demonstrate proficiency on the district Common Core State Standard benchmarks by the end of the year. And proficiency is a score of 75% or higher. Again, we'll be tracking performance on subgroups as well. We also included in our goals English language learners and tracking their progress in meeting state objectives. And in this particular case, it is our performance target to exceed the state set goal that they will set for us. The state does set certain standards. Special education, this is ELA, students with disabilities. Now, obviously, our students with disabilities, K-5, will still be using the M-class assessments, and we will track their performance. But one of the things that we as a board, when we amended the policy a couple of months ago, we added to that policy tracking performance of students in meeting their goals and objectives on their IEPs. We added that because we knew it was important to do, because we were concerned that a number of students weren't demonstrating progress. We have to create the mechanism for us to be able to do that. We have to put that kind of system in place where we're actually able to get and quantify that information. So 2014, 2015, we're going to have to put together the system that's going to allow us to track that progress in meeting that objective. Norwalk students, graduating college and career ready. Our students, when they leave grade 9 and when they enter grade 10, have to be ready for grade 10. At the policy committee, we shared some information on graduation rates. We looked at the fact that the graduation rate for Norwalk was about 84.5%. It was 0.2% less than what it was last year, relatively stable. The state average graduation rate was 85.5%. Then when I looked at the data for Norwalk High, it was at approximately 89%. And Brian McMahon was at 88.8% stable. And I said, so how could those two schools have an average graduation rate higher than the state, yet our total graduation rate was 84.5? So then we came to Briggs. And there were 38 students at Briggs, of which they tracked 6 at grade 9 who graduated. But that's very misleading, because as you peel that back, a lot of the students who are at Briggs came from Norwalk High and came from Brian McMahon in their second and in their third year and in their fourth year. And as I went through and I looked at some of the individual report cards of students, you see where, in some cases, ninth graders repeated courses 2 and sometimes 3 years. We can't have that as a system. We have to do whatever it takes for all of our kids who make it to ninth grade to help them get through ninth grade, to be successful for grade 10. That's what's so exciting about the P-TECH program and what I saw in Brooklyn. The teachers in Brooklyn at that P-TECH program, for every single student coming into their ninth grade class, they said, you're going to be ready for 10th grade. We're going to do whatever it takes to make sure you're ready for 10th grade. You got to take 2 or 3 extra courses. You got to stay here at night. You got to come in on Saturdays. We will be here Saturdays, and they were. They ran Saturday schools. We're going to need to do the same. If we're going to improve graduation rates, we've got to make sure that all of our ninth graders are ready for 10th graders, and following that, our 10th graders are truly ready for 11th grade. So I share this with you because as we look at this data, it then tells us what are the structures and systems that we have to have in place to make sure that students are getting what they need. What role can guidance counselors play in our school as we're tracking students in ninth grade who are not? There's so much more that we can and should be doing. So data's a good thing if you use it well, to change practice, to do things differently, and to monitor what you're doing and making continual adjustments. The goals that we set as a board are going to be converted as soon as we get this baseline data, you will have it. We are preparing for a major 2-day retreat on June 24th and 25th with our administrative staff. We are planning to bring in school governance teams in August, on August 19th and August 20th, because they too will be accountable for achieving the same measures. They may be unique in terms of how they're doing it and how they're going about it, but we are going to have a system that's going to be organized around performance, and there's going to be an expectation of doing things differently to serve children differently. So I just wanted to give you this as an update because we talked specifically in the strategic plan about having structures and systems in place. This is what I meant. Rethinking how our committees work, what they do, how we look at data, how we report, how we monitor progress. And this is just one phase of that. And thank you for your time. I just wanted to share this with you.
Thank you. Any questions, Ms. Mosby?
Dr. Rivera?
Yes.
Since you're giving us updates and reports on these different programs, can you give us an update on the P-TECH program, where we are at now? And then can you give us a status on the Briggs program, the turnaround program?
You want it right now?
I'll
give you some highlights, and then I'm happy. In fact, I wanted to provide the board with an update on Briggs because we're at that point in time in the year.
Right.
There are some changes that are in the works right now that we are working through and with the state and with the current partner that we have.
Right.
So we want to share that with you, and so I will provide the entire board with a written update in terms of Briggs and the direction that's going in. In terms of P-TECH, we're really quite thrilled. We have oversubscribed right now. We have students on the waiting list for that ninth grade coming in. Ralph has been paying close attention tonight. I'm hoping that the board will approve. Actually, I'm sharing it as part of our agenda. An academy director that has been recommended. We're in the process of going through staffing. We have capital commitments from the state in terms of purchasing of materials, computers, equipment, and so on. We've had donations from certain foundations for us to support P-TECH, but they have an aggressive startup plan. And we've been meeting, and I've been meeting practically, well, at least every other week with Reggie Roberts as well. And I'm pleased, very pleased, and it's going to be a wonderful startup. I predict.
Okay.
And in terms of Briggs, I'm happy to, because I plan to do that to provide board members with an update.
I can wait for the report.
Sure.
That's good.
Thank you.
Just want an update. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we will now move on to the consent calendar. Chair would entertain a motion to approve consent calendar, which would include 6-2A, 2B, 2C1, C2, and C3. Mr. Kasimis moves. Is there a second? Ms. Keys seconds. I would note
There's a question.
that, I'll make a point and then I'll take the question. I note that I would suggest that the motion not include Albert Sacchi as principal of Nathan Hill because we've already appointed him. And that it also not include Karen Amaker as the county director because we have a separate item down here for that appointment. Okay, is that acceptable? And then Ms. Mosby.
Yeah, I want to move, to remove as separate items, a 6.2A, 6.2A, and 6.2B for further discussion. That's the budget transfers and the approval of personnel.
So you want all of them taken off consent?
Yes.
All personnel items and all transfers?
No, yeah. I just wanted to have a discussion on a couple of items on the personnel. But you know, that the two items, probably what you just addressed, where you took off
Yeah, I mean, Sacchi we've already approved.
right,
And then since Karen Amaker has a separate, she's 6D.
Right.
And those should both come out because one's already done and one has a separate vote.
right. Okay, so we can keep that as whole, because I wanted to sit here and address, since we have those two on here, and their salaries and so forth, but I wanted to address the fact that we did approve Hodel and Fensor. The approval was of them of the last time, and I haven't seen their salaries, and I was just curious as to what the salaries are on those two.
I would have to defer to Mr. Daluski if we have that information.
Excuse me, in terms of the salary for Mrs. Fensor, she is paid in accordance with the NASA contract. She is on step 2 of the salary grid. Mr. Hodell's position is in the ESG contract. Each of the positions are specifically identified, and there is a given salary for each position. So, there are about 9 people in ESG, and each position is specifically identified, and there is a given salary for that position.
Is there a given number that goes?
Mr. Hodell's salary is, I'm just off the top of my head, about $122,000.
Excuse me, why don't you, when you have the exact amount, let us know.
Sure.
On both of their
Be happy to
salaries.
send you an email tomorrow.
Yeah, with both of their salaries.
Sure.
The exact amounts. Okay,
Be happy to do that.
thank you.
Okay, so to clarify, are you okay with the
Okay,
personnel
right,
list with those
right,
two things taken off?
I just want to take off just 6.2B, so I can have discussion on the budget transfers.
Okay. All right, so the consent calendar will be approval personnel except for the 2 items I noted, and the 3 trips. That's the consent calendar for tonight. It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, okay, all in favor, please indicate. And that's unanimous. Consent calendar is adopted. We will now go to 6.2B, approval of budget transfers. There's a whole pile of them. I guess so we can, well, why don't we move them as, we'll move them as a group, and then people can make amendments as they deem necessary. So Chair would entertain a motion to approve the June 3rd, 2014 budget transfers. Motion, Mr. Barbas moves, Mr. Kasimis seconds. Okay, these are on the agenda. Is there discussion on the transfers? Ms. Mosby?
Yes, maybe Mr. Rudy. would like to come up. Thank you. First item that I want to discuss is the $200,000 transfer from Object 562 out of district tuition. I just need to get further clarification or the breakdown of what the 200,000 is. I see here that you're stating that it was moved from one account to the other, but it doesn't really tell me what it's all about.
There's about 3 or 4 accounts in the general ledgers that relate to out-of-district tuition, 562, 563, 566. The reason for the segregation has to do with the type of placement that's made, what institution they go to, and the services that that student needs based on the PPT. Typically, those accounts should be looked at as a whole. The reason we can't segregate or combine the accounts on our system is for the EDO1 that we have to submit to the state in August, it requires us to kind of carve out what institutions or placement agencies these students go to. So when we build the budget with the expectation of the type of students that we had in the prior year. As students go through the PPT process and recommendations are made, that student might have to go to a different organization based on the needs of the recommended PPT. It's not a shortfall, it's really it's a change in an account line based on the area that that student has to go to. Ideally, we would be able to have one account that would represent all of out-of-district tuition, but that's not something that we can do for the state.
Now, the other item is you have on here, I see $30,000 and $30,000 for custodial overtime. And I know on here you stated that it's for just overtime for vacancies and so forth. And I've been seeing a lot of this custodial overtime. And I'm wondering if you could at least give me an overall breakdown of all the overtime that this that this has allocated to, because I want to see exactly where's the benefit of all this.
It's primarily going to Norwalk High. There is about 4 vacancies, all of which are at Norwalk High that were frozen. So a lot of those shifts are being covered by overtime from individual custodians within the district. And as a policy, the Board of Ed does not provide overtime to floaters. Overtime can only go to a permanent bargaining unit employees.
Right.
So there are floaters covering those positions. Some are out on compensation because of an injury, but they can't work overtime and they have hour limitations. So that's what's caused the run-up in overtime. Going into the new year, we're scheduling custodians more appropriately so that we have a full high school, whether it be Brian McMahon or Norwalk High, because those typically are the schools that are used much more frequently. So this results in transferring some employees from one school to another so that Norwalk High is an example that we can have all the zones covered by existing bargaining unit employees and not have to rely so much on extended shift overtime.
Okay. And you will give me an overall breakdown of everything all together. For the next item on here, again, is the $50,000 and the legal fees, $50,000 in the litigation costs and $15,000 in special ed. I'm just wondering, are we monitoring this closely?
We are.
The legal.
When we look at the legal fees, it's primarily negotiations and litigation and expulsion hearing. We're doing very well in negotiation costs in terms of legal fees and expulsion hearings as well. Litigation really determines how long a case goes. There has been one case that's gone before the board on a number of occasions in executive session. This one case alone has cost nearly $30,000 for the district. So if you recall, when we had the transfer back, and I believe it was around February or so, we estimated an amount of approximately $60,000 to get us through the year. That has gotten us through May. And half of that transfer has been eaten up by just this one case.
And the special ed, $15,000?
We've had a number of PPTs that required legal services over and above prior years, so that is to cover this.
And we're keeping a close eye on that as well?
Yes. In the board packet was a detailed list of our legal expenses.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, concerns? All right, then we'll proceed to a vote. All in favor of approving the budget transfers, please indicate. Unanimous. Okay, thank you very much. That. Field trips are done. What do I do with my? Okay, so that takes care of budget transfers, trips. Okay, next item is approval of appointment of director of Norwalk Early College Academy. And make sure I get this right. Here we go. Okay, so to bring this up for discussion, Chair would entertain a motion to approve Karen Amaker, am I pronouncing that right?
Yes.
As Academy Director for the P-TECH Academy at Norwalk High. Is there a motion? Okay, Ms. Harris moves, Mr. Barbas seconds. Dr. Rivera, you want to bring us up to speed on your recommendation?
Certainly. It was a committee that was organized. Actually, there were 57 applicants, quite a few applicants, and there was a screening committee that was established. 5 individuals were selected to be interviewed by a larger committee. In our memorandum of understanding with IBM and Norwalk Community College, they were also represented on the interviewing committee. The committee included 2 parents, 2 teachers, a representative from IBM, and a representative from Norwalk Community College. I believe Tony, Bob, Ralph, and Reggie Roberts was also on the committee. They had advanced 2 finalists. I had an opportunity to interview both of the candidates. Again, we've been very fortunate to be drawing some excellent applicants for our administrative openings here. We had 2 outstanding candidates. I did recommend and am recommending to you Karen Amaker to become our new Norwalk Early College Academy Director. She has a number of years. She did a terrific job. She joined Norwalk Public Schools in 2007 and was an excellent guidance counselor. And she also has done an excellent job as a housemaster at Norwalk High this year. But that's not her only administrative experience. She had many years of administrative experience in other capacities prior to coming to Norwalk. Very bright, highly organized, very skilled. She'd make a terrific leader, and she's someone who I know the committee unanimously had confidence in her. I certainly have confidence in her. I also had an opportunity she did some work for me as I was trying to pursue how we might rethink using the Navion system. And she organized a committee of counselors, and we met regularly, and I've come to know her as someone who delivers. So I'm pleased to recommend her to you tonight.
Okay. Any questions or discussion? Ms. Murray.
Mine would be to the backfill of the house, as Karen is a very new housemaster at Norwalk High.
Right.
Has there been any discussion about that?
Yes, quite a bit, actually. Both myself with Mr. Roberts, we've had discussions about how to proceed. Mr. Dodona and I have had 2 or 3 discussions about how to proceed. We are obviously planning to post, assuming if this is approved this evening, we will post tomorrow morning. We're also fortunate because some of the candidates that were part of that 57 that applied, some of them may be candidates that we may want to consider. In addition, there are individuals who've applied to fill a housemaster vacancy at Brian McMahon, and I understand there's an excellent slate of candidates there. So my hope is that from those 2 processes and anyone else who applies, that we'll be able to move fairly quickly to get those positions filled.
Okay. Any other questions, concerns?
No,
Ms. Mosby?
I just want to say that
And then Sharon.
I'm pleased to see that you have this under the action as approval of appointment as with the resume and the salary on there, the whole entire package, and that's good for the public to see prior to a vote. So I'm very pleased to see that.
Ms. Harris?
I'm very pleased with the selection of Karen Amaker. We've had firsthand experience with her. She can galvanize anyone. She can speak the language of many different types of people. So I think she's a wonderful, wonderful recommendation.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, hearing none, we'll proceed to a vote. All in favor of the motion, please indicate. It is unanimous. There you go. Take another one. Good. All right, next item is 7A, April 2014 Financial Monthly Report. Mr. Rudel.
So we have completed the first 10 months of the fiscal year. Through those first 10 months, we have spent $128.5 million against an adjusted budget of $164.3. So we have spent 78% of our budget against a theoretical rate of 83%, well below our theoretical budget for the first 10 months.
John? Any red flags of any significance?
We will run high in substitutes, but there are corresponding offsets in salary accounts due to vacant positions.
Okay. Any questions? Good work. Keep up the good work. That's what I like to hear. All right, next item is discussion possible action to approve Hilliard-Rovick contract, which is in the packet. Chair would entertain a motion to approve the contract. Or to initiate discussion. Mr. Simmons moves. Is there a second? Ms. Keys seconds. Rich, you want to take us through this one? And
so Hilliard-Rovick's a company that we actually already use. They are a company that provide custodial supplies primarily. Currently, we use them as well as two other custodial companies. And so the way it operates right now, there's a lot of difficulties for our existing custodians to get the right type of supplies on time, the right type of equipment. So we try to explore opportunities in which we could use a large school system like Norwalk to create economies of scale, to create efficiency in how we get supplies. So we approach Rovick Hilliard, and their company's a little bit unique compared to other companies, because not only do they offer supplies and equipment, they also offer training. They also offer studies in how your schools operate and how you can better operate. And so by engaging with Rovick Hilliard, we're essentially going to make them our primary vendor. And by doing so, we're using the buying power of a school system this size to drive down our costs. Currently, custodial supplies get shipped to like a central shop, and then it kind of gets farmed out as needed. This leads to a lot of instances where custodians don't have the supplies that they need and are begging essentially for supplies on a monthly basis. So rather than having it sent to a central shop and then farmed out, this program allows the head custodian at the school to have a budget that's set for their school, to have a quantity list of what they typically buy, and then place orders online. So if this month maybe they need a certain amount of paper towels or soap, they can make that order themselves, and then they can have that order actually drop shipped to the schools themselves. And it gives a little bit more control and power to the head custodian so that they don't have to wait for supplies themselves. But it all stays within a budget because it all ties to an individual budget at each individual school. Additionally to that, it provides professional development and training to head custodians. It shows them OSHA techniques and standards that they can follow so we can have cleaner schools, ways to clean so that they can avoid injuries in the future. And that these are types of things that we hope that they share to the custodians underneath them. Additionally, it provides workflow analysis. One of the things that Rovick Hilliard does is they rate schools on APPA standards, one being hospital grade, your facility's fantastic, 5 being your school's pretty terrible, it's very dirty and dangerous, and they basically analyze the school on an individual basis, and they come up with a standard protocol on what you can do to improve that over time. And they provide checklists to the head custodian that they have to verify what their guys are doing, that, they're cleaning the bathrooms every day, they're using this type of product every day, the floors, et cetera. So it really standardizes the approach that they have to use. And additionally, Rovic Hilliard provides equipment. So one of the things that, for a lot of years, our custodians have mops and buckets. We'd like to get away from the mops and buckets and kind of give our custodians equipment, whether it be floor burnishers or things like that, so that we can have the floor shine and look a lot nicer. So by having this company do workflow analysis, they can kind of tell us how many floor burnishers maybe Brian McMahon needs, but how many Cranberry needs or Columbus needs, and kind of really come up with a rationale so we're not just buying one for each school and calling it a day. And there's preventative maintenance attached to those programs. So if the floor burnisher breaks, for an example, we're not just saying, oh, well, now we don't have one. It can be fixed and it can be maintained under essentially a warranty agreement.
Okay. Any questions? Yes, Ms. Keys.
Yeah, going through this, I want to thank you for putting this all together in a package, because it really, a lot of reading, a lot of information, but it's really well thought out, and it'd be great to have our schools up to par, really clean again, as they haven't been in many, many years. I also like the Hilliard University. How is that going to work as far as training and ongoing training, and how often and how will we monitor that?
So each of our head custodians will be outfitted with an iPad.
Okay.
So not only will they be able to use that for ordering supplies, as an example, they can go on like online tutorials. And then once a year, we'll call the head custodians in and have professional development, no different than you would if you had one for teachers. They'd come in, they'd learn techniques, they'd learn processes, they'd learn what the new OSHA standards are and how to clean to prevent, whether it's like cobwebs in a radiator or whatever it might be. And so it's really to kind of get them up on what type of training techniques do you need to also prevent injury, and to really improve the quality of the cleanliness of your school. And then the hope is that as a head custodian, and they're being responsible for the custodians underneath them, they can share that knowledge that they earned with their people underneath.
Okay, I think that's key, though, to make sure that the head custodians share that and share the best practices and what works and what doesn't with their staff.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Simmons?
When it comes to ordering supplies, is there a limit to how much they can order? Is somebody going to be monitoring that,
Well,
tracking
one of the
that?
nice things about this is it tracks the quantity of what they buy and exactly what they buy. So if at 1 month a custodian buys 1,000 rolls of paper towels, let's say, and historically we have that data and it says, okay, you usually buy 100, we can go to the head custodian and say, okay, why did you buy 900 more this month? And we can make sure that it's not going in somebody's trunk, for example, or so that we can kind of see the peaks and valleys of what they're ordering, and we can really get a better idea of what a school's need is. The needs of supplies at an elementary school aren't the same as, let's say, a high school. And so they literally actually go into the school and they count every fixture in every room and say, okay, you have X amount of soap dispensers in your bathroom, so that means based on having this many soap dispensers and this many kids in your school, it's going to probably be used X amount of times, therefore you're going to need X amount of soap. And then there's like a threshold of like plus or minus 3%. So if they go above that plus or minus 3%, something's clearly wrong. Either somebody's stealing soap, or we're not using it correctly, or maybe it's sitting in like a room somewhere. So they really are very meticulous. And one of the things that was nice about Hilliard Rovic is he was very upfront and said, if your schools don't look well, I don't want to do business with you, because it's a reflection on my company. And he doesn't want the Norwalk Public Schools to look dirty, because then it makes his company look like they're underperforming.
Just as a follow-up, whose responsibility will be to track that? Is it finance department? Is it
The
maintenance?
facilities department.
Facilities department, okay.
Any other questions?
Can I wonder anything, Mike? I'm
Yes.
sorry. Will we have a report from you once this is implemented and all set 6 months from now, just to see how we're progressing and how we're doing?
Yeah.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is terrific. I mean, it addresses several things. I like the focus on education and training on OSHA standards. We have had a lot of injuries here, and to the extent that we can implement, OSHA standards properly, we can hopefully reduce the injury rate for these employees. I think the drop shipping of custodial supplies is a great thing to do, particularly with the tracking mechanisms that you've got built into this. So you'd immediately see if somebody was doing something out of order. When the custodians had come here a couple of months ago and complained that they didn't have adequate supplies and whatnot, and I had asked you to look into that, and you said, well, yeah, actually, they're right. And so I'm pleased that this contract should directly address that issue of making sure the custodians are not hampered from performing their duties because they don't have supplies or the equipment's not working. So there's a lot of really positive things about this proposal for improving the operations and, making the schools safer as well as cleaner. So I think it's a great idea. Anything else? All right, all in favor of approving the contract, please indicate. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Opposed? Abstentions? 1 abstention. All right. As the motion is adopted, contract is approved. Thank you, Rich. All right. Next item on the agenda is a discussion of policy 9130.1, bylaws of the board. As we've noted, to adopt a policy, our procedure requires a discussion at one meeting but can't be voted on at that meeting. So this is discussion only, and a vote would happen presumably at the meeting 2 weeks from now. I had originally put together a proposal to put into our bylaws a description of our committees and their duties back in the summer of 2012. One of our members in particular had questioned, well, how do these committees get created? And our current bylaws basically just say the chairman appoints all committees. So the current structure appears to simply say the chairman can create any committee he wants and give it any duties it wants. When that was critiqued, I thought that was actually a legitimate critique. So I looked at a number of other boards in the area, most of which that I found spell out in the bylaws what their committee structure is. So what I did was I shamelessly plagiarized Stratford's bylaw because it was the best developed of the ones that I saw, and then I adjusted it to fit the committees that we have traditionally had here. So if you look at the document in the packet, the first 3 pages is a clean version of the version of the bylaws that was approved by the policy committee. The next 3 pages are a red line that shows how that proposal was changed from the original draft that I had done back in 2012. So you can see that the policy committee made certain additions which are underlined. This was based on recommendations from committee members, particularly Mr. Kasimis, and also by Superintendent Rivera. Then you can see that some things in my original proposal have been deleted. Some were expanded and explained. And when you factor all those changes in, then the clean document that you see, the top 3 pages, is the resulting proposal that was approved by the policy committee. So I think it's a good practice for a board to try to get specific about which committees it has, what their names are, what their duties are. When you look around at the other boards, it is unanimous at these places that I've seen that the board chair appoints the committees. But if these get written into the bylaws, then it isn't the chair who decides what the committees are and what their duties are. That decision is made by the board when it approves this and puts it in the bylaws. So I would certainly urge the board to support this, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or if there's any concerns. Yes, Ms. Mosby.
Number 4, Negotiation and Personnel Committee.
Yes.
The section, the bullet that says to review and make recommendations concerning personnel policies, district diversity hiring plan. I thought the district diversity hiring was a separate, a separate committee. That's how it's been set up. So with this here, it's indicating that that entire diversity hiring plan is going to be put under negotiation and personnel.
Well, there was a diversity hiring committee that was created in the 90s, I think, that created the original diversity plan, and then that was adopted by the board. But that committee is long gone. So there is no continuing diversity committee.
Let's see, I was under the impression, and I was told, that that committee would still be in existence. And this was asked a few months ago because I was one of the members on that committee. So it wasn't that long ago, and that we were going to bring that committee back up again. So now with this here, it's indicating that you're trying to do away with that committee, period, and stick it under negotiation personnel. And that wasn't the impression that I received. And other people who was on that committees, that wasn't the impression that they received either.
If I could explain how I interpreted it, we currently have a policy that hasn't been amended in years. It's our district diversity hiring plan. And it did include, as part of that group, a committee, which are still actually in name of some of the people who aren't here. The way I understood it was that there would still be a committee that would make recommendations, but ultimately the board has to approve it. The board has to approve it as policy. So that's how I understood it, that the policy would still call for a committee or a similar makeup of a committee, but ultimately the negotiation board policy committee would be reviewing that and advancing a recommendation to the full board, unless maybe I'm wrong.
That's not the understanding that we received. And by moving that over, that means you're trying to stick it all underneath negotiating personnel under one particular committee. And since this is a district diversity hiring plan, we had, at the time, I believe Bruce Morris was on the committee, and we had other people from other organizations that were part of it in order to, I guess, bring in more diverse, hiring into the district, since we are lacking that. And just to sit here and just take that, I'm not comfortable with it. And I will talk to those others that are on that committee and see how they feel, because they probably don't even know that this is even in this, because a lot of times people don't really review this deeply. But I will go back to them and I will discuss this with them, and I will tell them what is going to is going to happen, and see where they feel, because we have other organizations, people that sit on them, that were part of that committee, and this is not what was told to us. And I just want to go around to the community, and I'm going to bring it out there and find out where they sit with it. And because personally myself, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, personally myself, I don't like to have this type of I don't like to have this taken and stripped from me. In a sense, I like to have, I know negotiation personnel committee, that's fine, because this is a committee that the chair appoints someone to it. So that means that our say, the other people, is going to be very limited. And I don't think in something this wide, it needs to be limited. So I'm concerned about that. And I'm going to bring it out to the community and ask where they sit with this.
Okay, Ms. Murray?
I heard you say, Dr. Vera, that that wasn't your understanding. You discussed this with...
My understanding...
No, who did you discuss it with? I guess that's really my question.
Well, I was the one who put that in here, because there was a recommendation that said to review and make recommendations concerning personnel policies. And as an example, I thought the district diversity hiring policy. I never envisioned that would call for the elimination of the committee that would be part of management's in getting input from different people to create a policy or modify the current one, but they would have now an avenue to bring it for approval, which would be the policy committee. So they would bring it to the policy committee and then get advanced to the board. So maybe I was in error, but that was my understanding of what the practice was.
Was this discussed with the Director of Human Relations, with Bruce Morris? Was he part of that discussion?
No.
Okay.
Because I believe that policy is a board policy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it is.
It is a board policy, but let's talk about the diversity hiring, that committee. That's what I think needs to be clearer, and I think that would come with a discussion with the person who headed that. And then we can move on the basis that on the foundation, we'll all be on the same page. I think that's what's going on here. You have an understanding, your interpretation, certainly the members of the committee, the ones that are sitting here and ones who are in the community. So I think that's what's happening. That'd be the first step as far as I'm concerned, to have a clear understanding on the same page. And then we can move forward.
Well, the question I would ask is, we have a policy in place now that calls for a committee, and let's assume we pull the committee together, which we've actually talked about doing, to update that policy. Are you saying that that policy should not go to the Negotiation Personnel Committee, that it should go directly to the full board? I mean, that's we're here to talk about a policy that governs the committees, and my assumption was that since it affects personnel, that it logically, a major policy like that would go through a personnel committee and then to the board.
No, with this right here, going through a negotiation personnel committee, that's only a couple of people that's sitting on that committee. And right here, it says that they will review and make recommendation concerning. So if we have the committee and there was recommendations put out there, this committee here could go in there and review what's out there and say, I don't really like this, and make some kind of tweak to it before it gets to the full board. And that's what we're trying to avoid, in a sense. It needs to sit here and go to the committee and let the committee make the changes, recommendations, so forth. Then it comes to the board and the board as a whole, since it is dealing with diversity hiring.
I'm feeling that you don't have a clear understanding of what's in place, and that's what I feel. You should go back to the foundation, to the beginning, and speak with the person who put this together, who's been working prior to your coming on board, and then we can take off from there. That's just, because I think the interpretation here, I think that's where we're kind of on the same page.
I'm clear about what's in place. I am absolutely clear about what's in place. The question is, should what's in place, if there's an amendment to the policy, should it go to a policy committee or should it go to the full board? And that's where I don't know what the practice has been here and whether or not it ever went to a policy committee in the past or to the board as a whole.
And that would be cleared up if you had the conversation. I think that's where my question comes.
Well, I mean, to make a point about this, you can have conversations all you want with members of that committee, but it's this board that ultimately decides what policies are, whether that committee approves them or not. So when we put a budget together, we run the budget through the finance committee first. When we deal with a policy, we run that through the policy committee first. If we come up with a security plan, we're going to put it through the facilities committee first. I don't see why a diversity hiring plan or any other personnel policy wouldn't go through the personnel committee first. And just like the finance committee or the building committee or curriculum committee or whatever will certainly make recommendations to the full board, I don't see why the personnel committee can't do the same thing. I mean, this board is not going to delegate its authority over board policy to a committee of non-board members, I assume. So I don't see why there's an issue with having any of those things go through the appropriate committee before it gets to the board. The board always has the ability to reject a recommendation from the committee. Nothing that a committee votes on is binding on this board. The policy committee recommended adoption of this. We're now discussing, should we include this recommendation from the policy committee? And if the board doesn't want to include it, it won't be included. So I don't see how that's any different from this.
It's you know what? It's different in a sense. The district diversity hiring plan was a committee that was put in place. We were told that the committee was going to start up again because of all this transitional, changes that was going on, and that was where we were led. So now we're being told something totally different, and like I said, I'm going to go out.
Well, who told people
I'm going
that
to
the
go
committee was
out.
going to be reconstituted? The board certainly
That
didn't.
was the impression that we received, and
From who?
From Dr. Rivera.
When did, what?
Yes,
That the committee was
that
going to
was
be
the impression.
reconstituted?
It came up at one of our meetings about the diversity hiring plan, and we brought it up, and you said that's something we're going to look into and get back on track with. That's what you said at one of the meetings.
That's right. We were going
Yes.
to update the diversity hiring policy. We're going to bring the committee together. We're going to update the policy. Problem with the committee is Sal Corda is no longer here. His name is there. There are names on that committee that have to change. There are other people who are not on the committee. So there will be a committee. There was never an expectation that there wouldn't be a committee. And the sense was that we would revisit it. We'd make some recommendations. Bruce would be leading that process. That's his job. That would be part of what would happen. And it would come back, what I thought, to a personnel negotiations committee. But I think what the difference here is, what I think I hear you suggesting is it shouldn't go to a committee. It should rather go to the full board as a whole. That's what I think I hear you saying.
That's what, yes, diversity hiring, yes.
But I never said anything about disbanding a committee or not doing anything
Well, here,
different.
the recommendation here is indicating that you want to disband it.
No, that's not what that says. All that
that's-
says is that committee would make recommendations concerning personnel policies. Now, if the diversity hiring committee is reconstituted, and obviously there's a bunch of people on there who are long gone, you'd have to reappoint the committee. If that committee with Bruce Morris and Dr. Rivera wants to do a review and make a proposal to come to the board, then we would send that to the appropriate committee to review, as we would with anything else. I mean, when people propose to us, amending our bullying policy, we didn't bring that right to the board. We sent it to the policy committee. Policy committee reviewed it, brought it to the board for recommendation. I see the same process working here. If the diversity committee makes a recommendation, we send it to the appropriate committee, they evaluate it, they bring it to us. The board as a whole still has to make the final decision.
I can see that working if we had committees where everyone was able to participate in a sense. But since
Every
we don't
legislative body
have-
has committees that aren't consisting of the entire legislative body.
Since we don't have that, there's concerns, especially with the diversity hiring part of it.
Okay.
Which I know that might be a little bit,
Okay. Point noted, this is just discussion, we're not voting on anything.
yeah,
tonight.
I know. But it's just that I at least take into consideration, some other people's feelings in a sense of how important this is.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, discussion? Ms. Keys?
I think that's also a reason why for policy it was brought up, because we discussed it originally, and then it's never made a decision as far as policy or any committee, and then it's fully brought to the board to discuss it further. And then our next meeting, we'll have it hopefully as an action item, but that's why I think we're all here now, just to discuss it and get ideas and what we need to do.
Okay.
Just
Yes,
for
Mr.
clarification
Sims.
purposes, what we're saying is that the diversity hiring committee does not report to the negotiation personnel committee, correct?
No, there's no
Okay.
connection.
Okay.
It's just if they made a
Correct,
recommendation
yes.
to the board, it would go to this committee for
It's
review.
just the plan.
Yeah.
That is developed
The committee would be completely
through the
separate.
personnel
from this.
committee. Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to be clear.
There's those wording to review and make recommendation concerning in that district, anything that has to do review and make recommendation. If that committee was to bring it to the policy committee, and if policy looks at it and say, you know what?
Negotiations.
Negotiations.
Would go to negotiations.
Negotiation and personnel committee. If they goes there and they look at it and say, well, I don't like that language, I don't like this. And then, they turn around and said, they're going to review and make recommendations. That means that they might want to stick and put something in themselves or take something out. So that defeats the purpose of that committee, putting something together and bringing it there.
Well, wouldn't it defeat the committee if the full board made a change?
No, because then it's a full board, but have a discussion, because
Well,
then
the
it's just
full board
based
has to
on-
make the final decision on any of these things anyway when they go to committee. I mean, by your logic, we should abolish the whole committee system.
No,
Why
I didn't say that.
Why would you have a
Don't put that in my mouth.
$165 million budget put together
Don't
in a
even-
finance
Mike,
committee,
please, let's
but you
not,
can't do this in a personnel committee?
let's not start getting down to that level. Let's not.
That level?
Yeah, let's not.
Okay.
Let's not.
All right, anything else? Rosa?
I do believe, though, part of it might be where negotiations committee, that was separate, personnel was a personnel committee, which was the board of the whole. And I think that's where the entire board was able to discuss what the committee had proposed to bring to us. It was never filtered through what you're now calling a negotiations and personnel committee. That is another piece that it seemed to kind of pick up speed along the way. And I think once before when I mentioned this, Mike, you said that that was put together, or no, you inherited that from the previous chair. I think that's what you said, that term.
Well, I remember actually how that happened, because Jack had appointed the committee as negotiations and personnel. And the reason that I had raised that was that the board didn't have a personnel committee, and nothing in the policies say anything about the board having to act as a committee in the whole on policy. So it was another one of those things, that Manny runs into every day, and I run into, well, we've always done it that way. And which seems to me to be a poor way to do anything when you're running an operation this big. So I had asked, I remember this very distinctly, I asked the chairman of the policy committee, Mr. Colorasi, what do you do when you're dealing with a personnel matter? And he said, well, we always send it to the negotiations committee. Oh, all right. Well, then de facto, the negotiations committee is functioning as a personnel committee. Why don't we name it that? So, you can look at this. The curriculum and instruction committee reviews and recommends. The finance committee submits pro forma to the board for final approval. Negotiations recommends approval of contracts. Policy committee reviews and recommends and proposes revisions. School facilities recommend. This is the same on every committee. I don't see why, of all the things that we do, all the things in curriculum, instruction, finance, negotiations, personnel, policies, school facilities, and planning, the only thing that can't go to a committee for preliminary review is the diversity hiring plan. It's certainly an important plan, but so are a lot of these other things. So is a K-5 literacy program. So is a $160 million budget. If it's appropriate for those to go to committees for review, why isn't it appropriate for this one to go?
That's not the only thing, as Mrs. Murray stated. This was two separate items. One was negotiation, one was personnel. You stated that.
By tradition.
You stated.
Well, I stand corrected, because Mr. Colorasi told me they were not separate. That they actually, when the personnel matter came up, they would refer it to negotiations.
You stated.
He might be wrong, but that's what he told me.
Right, but the simple fact is that now you want to combine everything, and then you're just telling us that we want to throw everything there. Personally, I'm not comfortable with giving up my personnel committee responsibility, in a sense, whether it's on the books or not, based on something where you want to put together. And just because I'm bringing up that district diversity hiring plan shouldn't even fall under negotiation and that type of committee, you're telling me that, which that doesn't make any sense as far as I'm concerned. Because I'm not comfortable giving up that kind of right, in a sense, where I don't have the say and someone else who's going to have say. I don't feel comfortable with it, and that's me putting it out there. As my right as a board member sitting here, I want to keep that right. And
Which wouldn't you have it when the personnel committee made a recommendation?
Not when this diversity hiring plan has to go somewhere else where someone's going to review and make recommendations.
But that's all it is a recommendation. It still has to come to the board for a vote.
But that defeats the purpose of that committee, that hiring committee. If that hiring committee goes to the negotiation and personnel committee and tell them that we have 5 items on here, and that committee looks at it and say, I don't like those 5 items, I don't like 2 of those 5 items. And so we're going to strike those. Okay? Then that means what comes to the board? The 3 items, right?
And you could make a motion to add the 2 back in that have been struck.
Why should we keep going through all that stuff?
We do it, the Common Council does it, the Zoning Commission does it, the state legislature does it, Congress does it. This is how all legislative bodies work.
I'm not here about that. If we can avoid all of that stuff, why sit here and have the diversity hiring committee bring in? Okay, fine.
All right.
Right, that's fine, Mike. That's fine.
All right, this will be back on in 2 weeks
No respect
for
for
further
us.
consideration and a vote.
None at all. No respect for us, Mike. That's fine. Let's move on.
All right, next is committee and representative reports.
I still have something on this.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Just
please,
a
go
quick
ahead.
one. It's a different topic. It's still on the board. Where it says committees, it says the very last line at the top, the board chairperson shall appoint the chairperson of each subcommittee. Shouldn't we add that the board chairperson shall also add each member of the committee?
It says that right here. He says,
Where?
shall be appointed by the board chairperson, the committees,
Yeah,
and then also appoints the chairperson.
correct. What about the members of each
Right
committee?
here. The committee shall be appointed, they said, the following standing committees, with the exception of the exec committee,
Yeah,
remember, because we
yeah.
defined that, they shall be appointed by the board chairperson. So the board chairperson appoints all the committees, and then also appoints the chairperson.
Okay, I just don't, it doesn't say members. I know I'm getting sticky with just the letter.
We can
numbers, but
certainly
it
add
says-
that in for clarification.
Okay. It just says that it's appointing the committees, not the members of the committees.
Members of the committee. Yeah, we can change
That's
that.
all. Thanks.
All right. We will now move on to committee representative reports. We'll start with Ms. Murray. Anything for finance?
No, I don't. Thank you for adding the standing committee meeting dates on the
Managed to
agenda
squeeze
as
them
I
in.
requested. I think that's, and once again, yes, we do know, but we have the public who's actually looking at our agenda when it's posted and on the site, so I do note that you follow through on that. So, but no, there is, we canceled the, let me just finish, May, and as you can see, we have the June meeting scheduled.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Kasimis, any reports?
Just that athletics, most of our teams made it to the first round of the states, but that's about as far as they went. So officially, our sports season is just about over.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Negotiations personnel. Mr. Barvis.
So since our last board meeting, we've had, the committees met with two union groups, the NFUP and the food service union, and we have, our next two upcoming meetings are both with the food service union, one on June 12th and one on June 26th. And then on June 19th, based on the, I guess it's
State
state law,
statute,
we need to begin, have our first meeting with both the NFT and NASA. So there'll be some initial meeting at that time, and then the clock will start with those two negotiations with those two groups.
Okay. Ms. Harris, anything to report? Okay. All right, board member, I'm sorry.
Policy, I think we already discussed.
I'm sorry, I skipped right over you.
I think Dr. Rivera, I mean, we just went through as far as the committee structure, which we just discussed. Also, I had mentioned, but we did have Diane come out to discuss, cost savings, or she did a fabulous CCJEF. She did a fantastic job as far as presenting that and having a presentation. I'm glad that she came tonight to have a PowerPoint presentation. So I think it was great to have the public listen to that and figure out what our next steps will be. Dr. Rivera also mentioned tonight, but our graduation requirements, so we are going to discuss that further, hopefully during our next meeting. And our next meeting will be the last Tuesday in June,
Okay.
this month.
All right. I think that covers that. Okay, board member announcements? Any announcements? Comments? Ms. Keys?
I did go to a ceremony honoring recognition of Mr. Harris, who was our Director of Food Services for almost 40 years, I believe it was 39 years. And it was really a wonderful ceremony, and he really has given his heart and soul, has had a lot of passion for Norwalk Public Schools, retired, I believe, several years ago, but he's still very active in the community, and it was a great outpouring of support for members of the community that came by.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll now move on to number 8.1, approval of the minutes for May 6, 2014. Chair would entertain a motion to approve. Mr. Kasimis moves. Second, Ms. Keys seconds. Any changes, corrections to the minutes? All right, hearing none, we'll proceed to a vote. All in favor of approving the minutes, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All opposed? Abstentions? One abstention. Okay, minutes are approved. Now, what did I do with that? I was requested by our counsel, Mr. McKeon, to bring up tonight the settlement of the Davenport lawsuit. I sent everybody an email on this. I can't find it. Yes, where the hell is it? I had it. Can't find it. Oh, here it is. Got it. Okay. As you know, we discussed this in executive session and gave some guidance to our counsel. He negotiated a settlement that came in at the figure that had been discussed in the executive session. They've put together a fairly standard settlement agreement for that payment of $65,000, which would bring this lawsuit, which is many years old, as we know, to a conclusion. He did ask if we could, I told him that, it wasn't on the regular agenda, but he asked us to do it tonight anyway, because if we wait to the 17th, you're closing in on the start date for the trial, which has not been rescheduled. We're still supposed to start trial, and he doesn't want to have to, start prepping for the trial because of that. So, Chair would entertain a motion to suspend the rules to add to the agenda the consideration of the Davenport settlement agreement. So moved by Mr. Kasimis. Is there a second? Ms. Keys seconds. All in favor of adding to the agenda, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Meeting is amended to add this item. Chair would entertain a motion to approve the settlement agreement and release with Diane Davenport with a settlement in the amount of $65,000. Is there such motion? Mr. Barbas moves, Ms. Keys seconds. Discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll proceed to vote. All in favor of approving the settlement, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4. All opposed? 1. Abstentions? 1. Okay, that's 4 in favor, 1 opposed, 1 abstention. Motion carries. Settlement agreement is approved. And the only thing left on the agenda is adjournment. Motion to adjourn. Mr. Kasimis, is there a second? Ms. Keys, all in favor? Meeting is adjourned.